Greetings from Semillas, Seedlings, a working class think tank and action center. Today we bring you great news.
No one is talking about how the great changes coming about will impact you and your family. The problem is, no one really speaks for America's common people, the ones who do the work. We have no independent voice or source of information needed to defend our own interests. But at Semillas Seedlings, we have a plan. We are sowing the seeds of transformation.
Actually, we've got good news and we've got some bad news. The good news is that 8.3 billion people on Earth are able to survive on a recurring daily basis. This is truly an amazing fact. In fact, we have arrived at a period of human development due to technology and the means of communications where we can solve pretty much all the great problems facing the world today. We can achieve all the great things that past religions and philosophers foretold. Today, the proverbial debate as to whether the glass is half full or half empty is clear. The glass is more than half full now, and we now have the ability to keep filling it to the benefit of all. Unfortunately, the problem is that the glass leaks. Natural setbacks occur, obviously, earthquakes, hurricanes, etc., but human causes are the greatest setbacks due to hate, greed, and ignorance. Which brings us to the bad news. According to the doomsday clock maintained by the American Federation of Scientists, we are now closer to nuclear annihilation than ever before. According to this clock, we have been anywhere from 10 to 20 minutes away from nuclear destruction over the past 70 years. Today, however, the doomsday clock says we are at 80 seconds away from destruction. That's because two wars funded by your tax dollars in Ukraine and the Middle East today have gotten to a point where there is increased possibility of going nuclear. While you were distracted with the daily obstacles of life, the possibility of nuclear war is now closer than ever before. But if you complain, those running the system tell you that you are ignorant and not to pay attention to such things. That's why Semillas, a working class think tank and action center, exists, to keep you informed of what's actually happening, not the lies and disinformation that you're fed on a daily basis. The fact is, the United States is the most powerful nation on earth, and it has been on a perpetual war footing. In war, preparing for war for over 85 years now, at the cost of trillions of dollars and millions of lives. Just imagine what could have resulted had we taken a different path. And paraphrasing Martin Luther King Jr. from the 1960s, the bombs dropping overseas today are having a devastating impact on our very own people at home. Did you know, for instance, that Social Security and Medicare programs for those disabled or retiring will be broke in less than 10 years? So if you're under 55 years old, don't plan on having this available. Did you know that your cities and schools may be facing bankruptcy right now? And again, most people are not paying attention. Here's another clock that we want you to look at. It's the official U.S. debt clock. This tells us that we owe a lot of money. In fact, the official debt, which is set at roughly $38 trillion right now, says that each U.S. taxpayer owes about $375,000 right now. But that clock only lists the official debt. There is the unofficial, off-the-books debt, which is 5 times greater. And then there are the many states like California, Illinois, and New York that also owe a ton of debt, combined with the pension debt crisis that few people talk about. In fact, government in general is looking more and more like one big Ponzi scheme, a financial hustle. And who will get stuck with the consequences of this impending disaster? The American working class. War and debt. From Semillas' perspective, these are the two major issues facing the American public today, which brings up the fundamental issue from our perspective, that humanity is at a crossroads. Before us are two paths, war and destruction or peace and prosperity. And it's obvious what choice we would all make, right? Unfortunately, a nasty little core group of very rich, very powerful people are committed to the path of war and destruction. Less than 1% of our population is leading us towards human disaster. While 99% of the people in the United States and the world want peace and prosperity, this 1% controls our government and politicians. And they profit from a program of war and destruction that is now bankrupting our society. So what can we do, you ask? We are just the little guy, the common person. We have no power, little money, no time, and obviously no real democracy to defend the will of the majority. So that's where Semillas, a small community center, a working-class think tank and action center based in a low-income Mexican-American barrio, comes in because our experience provides some basic insights into what must now be done to protect and enhance our families and our communities' well-being. And we believe that with your help, we can lend insight into these turbulent times, and just as importantly, provide real practical options in order for us to survive these turbulent times. A think tank, you ask? What is that? And how can that benefit you? Actually, there are a lot of think tanks in existence right now, and they are all funded by very powerful people, the 1% who run everything. And they are the ones that influence the media, the universities, the cultural leaders, government, and especially the politicians voting to make key decisions. They're the ones that tell the politicians what they must do. In contrast, Semillas represents the ideas and actions of the people living on the other side of the railroad tracks. We are decidedly on the side of the working class and small business person, the common people who do the work, the consumer who pays the taxes. So you'll find that our advice is almost diametrically opposite of what you are being told by mainstream media and our political leaders today. The think tanks funded by the rich will tell you that we are all in this together, that the national interests of the American people are all the same, rich, middle, and poor, and therefore we must follow their lead. Semillas says that this is absolutely false, that the interests of the working people are almost diametrically different than the interests of the ruling class. And we want to make this perfectly clear. We are not one big, happy national family. The people at the top have taken advantage of the people on the bottom, and we need to seek a separate path from this ruling class. Of course, many of you already sense this. You see, we have a fake democracy. A society is stacked against the vast majority. But the system tells you that you are wrong, you are ignorant because you don't understand and accept how things need to work. And again, that's why you need a community-based think tank like Semillas to advocate for those who have no voice, but actually represent the vast majority of the U.S. population. We are at a crossroads, war and destruction versus peace and prosperity. The ruling class justifies war and destruction by telling us we are in danger. Semillas says it's the ruling class that has created these dangers in the first place. The ruling class says we need $200 billion extra right now to pay for the current disaster in the Middle East, and $1.5 trillion extra starting next year for a new round of military excursions. Semillas says bullshit. We need to cut that money, not just by in half, but to a third of current spending. And we demand that our leaders negotiate a peace treaty with our major so-called enemies that would require verifiable shrinking of all conventional and nuclear forces by all parties, so that we can finally finance peace and prosperity for all. Donald Trump mentioned the possibility of doing this in his campaign when he promised to be a peace president. We need to insist on this, no matter who the president and Congress are. And we need to stop believing the think tanks that tell us they are responsible. Russia, China, Iran. They are not the enemy of the working class, period. Just like the people of Vietnam and Iraq were never our enemies. They are just excuses that our ruling classes use to keep us in a state of perpetual war. Today, the top issues for America's working class are war and debt versus the possibility of peace and prosperity, with the prosperity part financed by shutting down the war part. Semillas advocates a policy of transforming the swords into plowshares, where we dismantle and scrap the war economy to finance an economy that will form the basis of peace and prosperity, not just for Americans, but for all people. So you see how different Semillas is from the think tanks that propel the ideas of the rich and powerful, over the politicians, over the dominant media, the universities, and major organizations throughout the United States? Little Semillas, seedlings, is setting the path for the rest of us. So let's talk about the road forward. How do we put these ideas into action? There are three focuses for us: political, economic, and spiritual. These are needed to propel the changes we must make. First of all, a fundamental roadblock to our proposal lies in the two parties that run our government. One is the party of the rich and powerful, and the other is the party of the rich and powerful. Republican and Democratic parties are two faces of the same coin, and America's working class needs to come to terms with this reality. Both serve the interests of the rich and powerful because that's the only way somebody today can raise the millions of dollars necessary to get elected as a politician from either party. Even if you wanted to implement honest government, you become compromised by the system. So the deck is stacked. Plutocracy, kleptocracy reigns. Kleptocracy being the rich thieves in government that administer the system for the plutocracy. So how do we achieve anything if we are powerless? Remember, we are the American working class. The economic base rests on our shoulders. We need an action plan to advance our needs, our interests, not those of the ruling class. Semillas' motto is independiente, towards working class independence and well-being. Politically, this requires detachment from the two predominant parties, the Democrats and the Republicans. Now, that doesn't mean creating a third party now, but psychological detachment is required. You need to accept that these parties do not work for you. So what you can do immediately is re-register as an independent or nonpartisan voter and send your local representative a message telling them that you cannot trust them and you're becoming independent. Independent status puts them on notice not to take your vote for granted. Secondly, we need to understand politics as an attempt to gain working class interests. Seedlings program attempts to influence politics from the top, but especially from the bottom up. At the bottom, we're talking about our most immediate and intimate contacts to politics, your city councils and school boards, where unfortunately the working class has largely surrendered its interests to the kleptocratic class, to the class of thieves that manage the interests of the plutocrats. Semillas recommends an intensive focus on our city and school governments and an analysis of how these budgets, which add up to hundreds of billions of dollars every year, can be restructured to meet local community needs rather than the needs of the special interests that largely control these funds today, just like the special interests that dominate state and national levels of governance. Many of our cities and school boards are facing serious financial problems, including outright bankruptcy. Now is an appropriate time to force a restructuring of these operations. In addition, these funds will become increasingly vital in the establishment of an alternative economy to sustain working people and communities. So this is where Semillas recommends we focus our attention. Semillas has substantial experience in local politics, community development, and cooperative economic development that can lend you a hand here. And we'd like to enter into an open dialogue with you on this subject. And this brings us to Seedling's second focus, which is creating an alternative economic structure that can help us maintain and sustain our families and communities, because we face radical changes in the upcoming years that will create major disruptions for us all, and we need to be prepared. For instance, estimates are that the new AI technology just being implemented will wipe out large portions of our jobs base, and the continuing debt dilemma makes it worse because it eliminates government's ability to help. An alternative economy addresses the basic needs of working people: food, housing, education, healthcare, business and product development, and works to create alternative, more locally sourced means to provide us with our necessities. In fact, an alternative economy is a way to escape the clutches of the massive corporate-dominated apparatus that runs our lives today. At Semillas, for instance, we are working to develop a makerspace, which is sort of a community-based laboratory where we hope to provide job skills development and product development ideas that could become new community-run businesses in the future. If you're interested in notions of alternative economic development, you should contact us. Finally, our third component, Semillas, is about creating a push towards spiritual, moral, and ethical reconstitution of our people. Modern-day society has become decayed, corrupting us all. We can see that much of our society has lost its moral compass. As individuals, many of us have lost any purpose in life. Lonely and alienated, we sink into crass individualism and narcissism. We have become a shallow society, mere shells of what it means to be human. And this is all a result of our misguided national priorities that make some people fabulously wealthy while the rest of us are mere iterations of the Roman slaves of 2,000 years ago, ignorantly enjoying a program of bread and circus while the empire slowly degenerated and ultimately collapsed. Semillas sees the need for a moral, spiritual, and cultural reconstitution. And this too will come from the values of the American working class, rebuilding and restructuring our families and communities to create viable, sustainable communities. Becoming independiente will provide the basis for this regeneration. There will be much more on these and many other topics that Semillas intends to cover in the upcoming weeks. In fact, we see ourselves as a sort of mini university that you and your family can turn to help traverse the dangerous landscape that we find ourselves in today. And ultimately, our goal is to create a new leadership that is urgently required to help transform America by providing the innovations and changes required to save our nation. Semillas, seedlings, wants to sow the seeds of transformation. So what do you think? Are you ready to join us in this adventure? Can you begin by liking and subscribing to this channel? Can you share this channel with other like-minded people? And how about engaging in an ongoing dialogue with our center to share our mutual community building experiences? And finally, how about considering financial support for this effort? As a community-based enterprise, we are a very low-budget operation that has no individual ownership. So your contributions go into expanding our organizational capacity to make positive social change. Please contact us if you feel that this is a worthy venture meriting your support. And until next time, from Semillas, we wish you the best and hope that you can become an important change agent for peace and prosperity. Thank you.